Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin Integrated Care Board. You will see that there are a multitude of papers. If you look at the agenda papers, 150 pages or so, plus the appendices, for those of you who have access to them, where there are about another 750 or something, you will be asking yourselves, how on earth are we going to transact all of that business? Well, we will through various means, and people are prepared as presenters to make sure that we focus on the most salient points. And the reason for so many weighty tomes for this meeting, are particularly just a confluence of timetables in part, but also we have annual reports and accounts for the old CCG on the one hand, for part year for the ICB on the other hand as well, and they take time. There's a statutory format that has to be fulfilled, but more of that later. So I promise you that we will be able to fulfil our business within the time allotted to us, and therefore no later than 5 o'clock this afternoon, including a break during midway through the agenda. So let me start. Apologies and introductions. Apologies from Leslie Picton, and we have Councillor Cecilia Motley here representing the leader, the political leadership of Shropshire County Council. Sean Davis has sent his apologies, gives me an opportunity to welcome Paul Watling. Where's Paul? There he is. Paul is the fairly recently councillor appointed the inheritor of the portfolio for health and social care, takes over from Andy Burford, probably does lots of other things as well, no doubt, the way in which council or responsibilities change over time. You're very welcome, Paul. We look forward to working with you. We've got quasi-apologies, people who will be coming late. Louise Barnett is in Halesfield and on her way here. She'll be joining us as soon as she is able to. We've got a couple of people having to leave the meeting before the end, Andy Begley and Gareth Robinson. Gareth has to pop in and out midway through the meeting as well. And we've got dialing in Trevor Macmillan, who we can see very clearly. Can you hear us, Trevor? Excellent. And we're expecting Niti Paul to dial in as well. As far as I know, she hasn't done so just yet. I'm looking for Jane. No, not yet. Okay. Now, I might well have missed some apologies and introductions, in which case I apologise. We'll credit them in the minutes if we need to do so. Just some introductory remarks. A couple, really. Simon will say more, I think, later in his report about industrial action, junior doctors. And we now have the prospect of a 5-day industrial action by junior doctors, followed by 2 days of action by consultant medical staff as well. I mean, it's having an impact in terms of simply the wear and tear and the stress on organisations trying to manage the consequences of that kind of eventuality, whilst at the same time dealing with very, very busy agendas as well. Wouldn't it be nice if the parties concerned could find a way of coming together and reaching some kind of accommodation about a way forward? I think we'd all agree the sooner that happens, the better. The other thing I was hoping to be able to celebrate this afternoon, and unless it's arrived in my inbox this morning, the long-awaited NHS in England, the long-awaited workforce plan, people plan, which has been much heralded. We understand it's been available for publication for a little while. It's been the subject of intense negotiations between the Department of Health and the Treasury in terms of its funding consequences. The Prime Minister gave us a trailer for it at the weekend, and the Laura Koonsberg programme, I think, I didn't see it myself. We really need that as soon as we possibly can, so we can start thinking about how we can deploy our workforce and employ them in a more effective way and recruit also better than we might have done in the past. It will clearly herald the building of capacity for training places, but as we know, training clinical staff in particular, whether they be doctors, nurses, midwives or others, takes a long time. But if the mark is put down that this is the intention, then I'm sure we will welcome it. I apologise that I'm not able to say more about it than that because it's not been published yet, which I think is a pity. I'm going to move us on rapidly. Declarations of interest, new interests, existing interests that conflict with an agenda item. I think we've discovered, Pauline, that we've not captured your expressions of interest, which if you're happy, we'll pick them up offline and we'll include them in the register therein. If there's anything that conflicts you during the course of today's agenda, we know you'll deal with that in the proper way. Thank you very much indeed. Minutes from the previous meeting held on the 26th of April and the action list. Are you happy that the minutes represent a true and correct record? There are various actions included within the action list. I wasn't proposing to run through them slavishly, but there are a couple I wanted just to draw out and just check where we think we're at, and then give you the opportunity to ask any questions as well. The first is the first one, actually. The Hewitt review, we said we would have a further discussion about it when the government had responded. The government responded the week before last. We've said the action by when appropriate, following the government's response. So the question I suppose I've got, Simon, is now that it's available, can we just think about how we build that into an agenda, a work programme for the future, please?
Yes, and Chair, we think this probably fits as a wider part of the conversation in terms of the future of system working and what does that look like, rather than a specific focus that just ties that down into the Hewitt review in isolation, because we see it as part of a package of things that are happening that will set a direction of travel going forward. So we'll link that into the development sessions with the board, if that's okay. That
sounds good to me. Everybody happy with that? Thank you. Action on page 3 relates to MSK. There's a large gathering of clinicians today thinking about the transformation of MSK services. And Stacey, I think you expect us to be able to have some recommendations, some proposals following the debate we had in March, coming to our next meeting in public. Is that right?
Absolutely. So the outputs and priorities, objectives from today, we will bring back to the next board.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from the action list that people want to raise? There are other things there which have not picked up. Moving on then. Questions from members of the public. We've not had any notification of questions. And on that basis, I'm happy to move on to the next item, which is the patient story, falls prevention. Alison Bussey, there you are. Hand over to you.
Thank you. So you're going to see a short film which will highlight an important service, or two services actually, preventing falls in our system. Fit for All is a service commissioned in Telford and Wrekin by the ICB, and that is to provide postural stability training to people at risk of falls. And in Shropshire, it's a service called Energize, which has been commissioned to provide a similar service to its residents, but that was commissioned by the public health team. Both services have been involved in a quality improvement pilot recently to increase the numbers of referrals and access to the service, along with a falls response service. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me, and you'll hear from Vanessa and Mel France, who were both at the end of this table here, who will be available to answer any questions, because the credit really needs to go to them and others that have been working in this. But I'm sure you'll agree with me that the prevention of falls, which currently accounts for around 30 ED attendances per day from our population of over 65-year-olds and over, is an important area in the prevention of ill health and keeping our older people well. So that is all I want to say. Let's see the film now.
Thank you.
My name's Jude Bailey. I'm a health improvement and exercise specialist. I coordinate a service called Fit for All in Telford and Wrekin. We are a falls prevention exercise service. We have 25 classes on the timetable across Telford and Wrekin, and today you're going to see one of these classes in action. The classes are so beneficial, not just for strength, balance, mobility, preventing falls, but also the social side of it, particularly coming out of the pandemic. We've seen, a lot of sedentary behaviour, people being very deconditioned. So the service is an ideal platform for people to come along, exercise, socialise, but more importantly, to get the strength to continue through daily life and hopefully not fall again. And we've seen a lot of fallers, and we do see a lot of fallers come into service. And usually by the time they've attended at least 20 weeks of our service, they generally don't report a fall again.
I met one person and she came up here for bingo, and then they started the Keep Fit. So I thought, right, with my feet, I'm going. And I have been here ever since. My feet have improved, my balance has improved, I've made friends. And it's social as well. We have a good laugh, especially when none of us can do what she's asking us to do. We're all out of coordination. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I have improved since I've been up here.
I was referred to the service a few years ago. I had a road traffic accident in 1997. I've since had 2 strokes. When I've had the second stroke, I was referred to Jude. She came to my home, introduced me to the exercising, which I did. The improvement has been absolutely phenomenal. I could barely stand when I met Jude. She thought I was about 80 years old. I was only in my 60s at the time. Doing the exercise has actually given me my life back, because I can now walk, stand. I do have a problem with my balance, but doing the exercises all the time has helped me, and I'm sure that's what's kept me out of hospital, and that can only be a positive. The exercising is absolutely superb for anybody that have got mobility problems, and I would definitely 150% recommend this Fitness for All.
So Vanessa and Mel are both available if anybody's got any questions or anything they want to pick up.
Thank you. Can I start? I couldn't see any men in the audience. It's a fairly obvious question, really. And is that deliberate, as it were?
No, I think it was just who was there on the day, actually, that
only women.
The comms team could get there to film. Wouldn't it be Edna? It was no. But I guess a lot of our population, it maybe reflects the population that are willing to go to the classes. I don't know, but I think we could find out a little more detail about the male-female split. It's a good point.
Thank you. Any other questions, Harry?
Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you. I'm just interested in how you organise yourself and how integrated you are into local care, particularly around primary care.
Yeah. So this was a part of, this service is normal business as usual service commissioned by the ICB. What we did was, we had some money from NHS England to prevent falls. So we used some of the money to look at these services with the leads to see what could we do better. And actually one of the things they said we could do better was to get more primary care referrals. So we put out quite a lot of newsletters and bulletins about how the service was going. And Mel can tell us a bit about the referrals that went in to that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously across the system. So yeah, we had a growth in referral from partners up 23%. So I thought that was quite significant.
So there's a lot of there's a lot more we could do to make use of these services, and through working with them to, rather than go with a traditional service that they're all commissioned for, but to do something a little bit different, we can really increase the numbers. So the classes that Jude runs, she developed a course on how to get up off the floor, so to prevent ambulance call-outs. And through doing how to get up off the floor and an introduction to postural stability and the exercise classes, which then increased her business as usual numbers. I think that the number of referrals.
So the number of referrals for the Fit for All, it was 823 participants. So that was across a 6-month period, which again was quite incredible. And Jude also ran some Fit for All classes for care home and nursing staff. And again, there were 3 courses run over 2 days, and they had 41 staff attend those as well.
So we also had increases in our numbers of people attending the other 2 functional fitness classes, and I think it shows from what the people contributed in the film that this really does help to make them feel better about life, stronger in life, and prevent some of those falls and ambulance call-outs.
Hello, thank you. That was really interesting. The lady in the video mentioned that she believed it kept her out of hospital, and you've just talked about reducing ambulance call-outs. How are you actually measuring the success of the programme?
So the programme's finished now because the funding's ended, but we did monitor the numbers of hospital admissions, ED attendances to both staff and generally from our GP practice patients, because some of them will go into other hospitals in the West Midlands. We didn't notice a stark reduction in falls numbers. So Alice and Alison said it's about 30 a day on average. Patients go into a hospital who are registered with one of our GPs. But what we did notice was that number really stabilised. So whereas we'd have peaks and troughs as high as 39 earlier in the year, we now stabilised, and actually the SAF numbers were around the low 20s. So we, considering this was January until the end of April, we think that probably helped to contribute to keeping those numbers level. But something else that we noticed, which we couldn't act on in the time that we had, is that we were looking at the people. So we're trying to prevent people through strengthening. We also put on with the money a response service. So 273 people who actually fell were responded to. 80% of those would have needed an ambulance had our service not been in place. So we noticed a real that quite a lot of people had started to be brought into A&E instead of into the ED rather than taken in by ambulance. So it's changed quite a lot, and now about 60% of fallers are actually physically brought in. And we noticed in the ambulance response part of the project that actually most of our patients were being brought in, were being responded to, not brought in, but being responded to in the night. And we wondered whether that was because relatives weren't around, neighbours weren't around to help pick up. So we would really like, this was only a short pilot, and we would really like in the future to be able to build a business case to grow this and to extend it and to have a longer period in which to properly evaluate.
There were others on my right wanted to come in, and then we'll move to the left. Julian, I think you were next.
Yes, just a quick one. With the fundings run out for is that the carers in the car with the fall service, or for the fall service? Yeah, so certainly through SHIP, there was a lot of, Tanya drove a piece of work about the fall service in terms of getting the carers in the car to come out to patients' houses and pick patients up. And there's a number of those services across the country, some run by the sort of Red Cross. And obviously, we talked there at SHIP as well about having some sort of drive to make a more obvious single point of contact, so that when people have had a fall, they can the public know where to call, but also if they do call 111, that those calls are directed into rapid response, and then patients have something that gives a ambulance staff that goes out to them and prevents some of these long lies. And it's the long lies that, so after people have fallen and then they're lying on the floor, that actually do cause the major problems, as well as the coming into A&E, because once you're in A&E, you get admitted. So I was wondering that, is that not something that, so you're looking at our A&E demand and our people going to hospital, that's something that we should be prioritising around the carers in the car to, and is there any plans to reinvest in that service?
Let me just gather other points and questions first, and then we'll turn to our experts and see if we can elicit some response. Patricia.
I think this is a really impressive piece of work. Actually, I love the video. So I think I think this warrants a bigger piece of work and a wider commissioning, but for two reasons. One, not only in terms of investing in the service, but also to make connections across other full services that are happening. So we're making sure that when we're picking people up, both figuratively and literally, that they're getting the right appropriate clinical assessment as well, to make sure that there aren't any ongoing concerns, and clinically that's being managed and treated, as well as receiving the confidence building and the exercise. I know firsthand from my mother-in-law, who was walking 3 miles a day a couple of years ago, had a fall, and she's now got double-handed carers 4 times a day. The impact of having a fall in somebody in their 80s, she's now 90, is phenomenal and catastrophic often. So I think this warrants a really big piece of work in terms of not only the continuation, but how we link up with other services. There seems to be a fundamental starting point here in 30 people coming into A&E being one of the main referral points. I mean, obviously, not all of those 30 falls are going to be just pure falls. It might be fall as a result of heart attack, fall as a result of stroke, etc. But nonetheless, that's got to be a starting point. I think the data and information around 60 patients being directly conveyed at the point of referral to the point of people ringing in, there's a real opportunity there of diverting both to rapid response services and others who can then link into district nurses, community therapists going to people's homes constantly, and they assess the environment. There's an opportunity there where we've got significant risk factors to be referring in. So I think there's an opportunity here of joining the dots a lot more in terms of making this service far more substantive and wider reaching. But I think it warrants, in terms of the data and the information, a look at, and certainly the 30 that come into A&E, that's the starting point, isn't it, really, as well?
Thank you very much indeed. Do you mind if we just take other points, and then we'll give you the platform, as it were. Who was next? There's somebody on this side. Well, Meredith. And
Thank you very
Lynn.
much. Really interesting. Love the service. Sounds great. I couldn't help but notice there weren't any men's voices. I did wonder whether or not they were all on the film, but just silent. But clearly not. So I was just wondering about the kind of the positive action that might be taken to promote it to those people who might otherwise be reluctant. I'd be interested in the demographics of it all, the extent to which the service is reaching out into the wider community. But I also wondered about whether it's possible to take it out on the road to places where people are, not expect people to come to the service. And finally, feels like a really big opportunity for the voluntary sector to be part of its delivery mechanism. So thank you very much.
And that's part of the question I think we want to put to you two and to Alison about what next, and how do we think about industrialising this approach, which seems to have pretty clear benefits. But Lynn, I hadn't forgotten you, I promise you.
No, don't worry. Two things from me. I just wanted to say that I think the experiences shared with us in our ambulance report really demonstrate the impact that falls have on people. We heard, from families, but also the individuals themselves about their experiences. So Health Watch Shropshire would really support further work around falls. I think it would benefit the whole system, but primarily the people who are falling. And also just thinking about the prevention piece, which is also key to this system, is I would imagine that social prescribing is part of the referral mechanism as well into the prevention piece, which is also in primary care. So there is that primary care element I just wanted to pick up on.
Thank you, Lynn, very much indeed. So, a number of points there, principally about how to scale this up, how to make it more sustainable, how to make sure it's properly, even more properly integrated with other things that we're trying to do. What are your views about that? And I'm going to turn to Alison just to give us a final summary before we move on.
So we, the project group actually was quite unique. It was a lot of practitioners and people that had never met, even though they were all part of the Falls agenda. So it was everything from the ambulance service to community practitioners. The rapid response team are absolutely key partners from the community trust. And also for the response service we used EZEC, the patient transport people, private ambulance service. So we at one point we had the fire service engaged as well, which so it was a lot of people, and I think one of the things that they really reflected on at the end of the project was the connections that they'd made. So one of the things we have been able to do is to secure some time of somebody at the ICB to actually completely unravel the Falls pathway over the next 9 months, really, hoping that for next year we can have a new Falls pathway. And I think there's space for all of our partners. I just think we need to organise it better, and we've got some historical commissioning from 2 CCGs around, so we can put it all together. So that's one really key thing. That doesn't address the response service, and I have a conversation with Gareth about how we might look at that, particularly as part of our response to the winter. But I think we need to work that up a little bit more and to see how we can really make that affordable and practical.
Okay, Paul, did you have your hand up as well? I'm sorry, I might have missed you.
I just wanted to pick up whether you've done any real cost-benefit analysis of how much it costs for that and how much the service actually costs. And have you got that information? And, you know, I mean, for me, that's a way of convincing people that this is the best way. And the other thing is, have you done any work with communities in terms of, you talked about staff from caring agencies, what about communities themselves, trusts, local community trusts and the third sector as well?
No, I mean, those are all really good points. We didn't have time for community engagement because we literally had the money and had to get spending it within a few weeks. Usual story, especially as it was a winter response, really. But we know how much we paid for what we got in the service, but obviously that's probably not the realistic cost going forward if it was a properly commissioned service. So I think getting a business case together and that cost-benefit analysis, you're absolutely right, that's what we need to do.
Thank you. So, Alison, what next?
Okay, well, I think Vanessa's articulated some of that really well, so I won't go over it again, but for me it is about the next few months with somebody unravelling what we've got, building in those cost-benefit analysis and putting forward that really comprehensive kind of, you can't argue with this case, really, because this is so important for people. You know, I can't emphasise enough just how much confidence people lose at the point that they fall. And it's awful. And if they end up in hospital because of injuries, they end up going into an ambulance, it's just not great for anybody. So we really do need to work differently, I think. I love the idea about being able to engage with communities as well, because they have a real role to play in this. But as Vanessa said, when you haven't got much time to start something and you've only got a fixed period of time to use the money over winter, which is kind of what it was, we need to build something in more, I can't say the word, sustainable going forward.
I think what the mood of the meeting is that this is really good stuff. It's interesting. It sounds as if it's extremely beneficial. And if we've not done a local cost-benefit analysis, I'm sure there will be learned papers based on research from other academic institutions we can draw upon. And I think also the mood of this meeting is give us some ideas, proposals in an appropriate way of what this might look like if it's industrialised, what kind of investment it might need to put it on a sustainable footing, and tell us about the benefits, because Paul's absolutely right. We can't just talk about investment unless we're clear about the benefits as well. So well done, and thank you very much indeed, and thank you to those who featured on the video. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much indeed. So the next item is the Chief Executive's report. Simon.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm going to take the paper as read, as ever, two main sections broken down into the update across a number of areas. The first part just covers the emergency decision that we needed to take in terms of the pharmacy, optometry and dentistry hosting agreement, just because of the timing of that as part of the NHSE transition and delegation. The Chair and Chief Exec took that decision, but that needs to be reported back to the board, hence it being in the update here. In terms of part two, we've talked about previously the three recovery strands, so the urgent and emergency care recovery strand, the elective and cancer recovery strand, and then the third one is the GP access recovery strand. So the three main recovery plans that are published nationally. We're at the point where practices, PCNs, are submitting their recovery plans to the ICB. I think there's a key piece in here, and there's a sweet spot here where this needs to be more than just what's put down on a piece of paper, where this links and needs to support and underpin the connection with other providers in the system, but also how do we then get into the development plan for general practice and PCNs to support that general practice engagement and input into the system work that we're talking about throughout this agenda. We've had the regional chief nurse from NHS England come and visit. That's set out in there. You've already touched on the industrial action, Chair. At the point of writing this paper, we'd not had the outcomes from the RCN ballot, but people will have seen that they didn't reach the 50% threshold, so there will be no further industrial action from the Royal College of Nursing, but we continue with junior doctors, and now we do have the consultant mandate in terms of that. We've talked previously about the West Midlands ICB Office of the West Midlands, and I've committed always to keep bringing back the update of the work that's happening on a West Midlands footprint in there, and just in bullet point form set that out. In section F, and this is a document that is also in the appendices. Colleagues will be aware, as a system, we're in the National Oversight Framework 4, which is those for the most challenged systems. As part of that, you will appreciate we need to plan to get out of level 4. And as part of planning to get out of level 4, we need to look at the exit criteria, and we need to develop an integrated system improvement plan against those exit criteria that articulates what are the steps that will be taken to move from NOF 4 into NOF 3 and then ultimately through to NOF 2 and NOF 1. So what the plan does that's in full in the appendices, although I recognise at times Excel doesn't make it easy to break it down on a page-by-page basis in a PDF, is take the exit criteria, highlights the plans on the page and shows the programme plan that underpins that with senior responsible officers against it and the actions that need to be taken as we work our way through. This gets submitted to NHS England, and as part of the recovery and support programme and intervention that we've got, will get signed off both with the region and with the national team, and then will be monitored against this as part of our delivery of the exit criteria to move from NOF 4 to NOF 3. The ICS digital strategy is shared again in full in the appendices, as in the public-facing friendly version of it, both in terms of the work that's gone on, and when we get into the joint forward plan, I think it's really clear that having the digital strategy and the ability to implement the digital agenda in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin is one of those areas that we need to bring a real focus to, because it will be one of the areas that will deliver a change in how we deliver services, both in terms of tackling rurality, in tackling some of our staff challenges, and in tackling some of the backlog that still exists across the system. And then finally, there's been some recent data published that shows the challenges we've got in terms of premature mortality in our patch with adults living with severe mental and enduring illness. Having looked at that information and looked at that data, I bring a brief update here on the work that's in place, both with local authority colleagues, with MPUFT, with other providers and with the ICB to look to address and improve those figures. But I would propose that we bring a more detailed update on mental health and some of the other work in terms of placing that at a future board meeting, Chair. So that would be my summary of the paper as shared.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, there's an awful lot in that. If you look at page 4 of Simon's paper, we're asked to note various things, and if you wanted to to comment, then you should feel free. There's some, as I say, some really important issues there. I want to hand it over to you. And maybe whilst you're thinking, let me just ask one question about the GP Access Recovery Plan. A question for Ian and Julian firstly. The degree to which you feel as if general practice has been engaged in discussions about the development of the plan. Has there been a lot of engagement? Has there been much engagement? Has there been any engagement?
Yes, I think is the answer to that. I mean, I think it's the beginnings of engagement, and some of the work's being... obviously, the plan should have been in for the end of June, and perhaps they've been asked, in Shropshire, said they've been asked to develop their own plans to go towards the access plans, and the PCNs are coordinating that. I think there is the national scheme for the GP sort of support, which has got a universal offer, a sort of intermediate offer, and an in-depth offer. And I think both nationally and locally there are challenges around that, because some of it is driven by the model that we're thinking that practices should move towards nationally, which is this modern general practice, which is very much a online-based triage for the majority of patients, whether they attend the practice or whether they ring in or go online. It's about sort of an access model which goes through a navigator service and then sending people on to other options and try and direct people to the right service. And I think there is challenges around that, in that it's not necessarily what patients want, it's not necessarily what local clinicians or nationally clinicians want. I think probably some 5 and 10%, I think it's about 8% of practices nationally have that model. 92% of practices don't. So there's some challenges around that. In terms of engaging in some of the development plans, there's issues around funding and capacity. The most intensive programme requires at least one clinician and one manager, plus probably a couple of other people, to be doing 2 sessions a week really of work looking at capacity, and that uses a lot of capacity which then won't be able to be replaced because there isn't really backfill out there. And I think there is a challenge locally around, for a lot of rural areas, about where else can we send patients to. You know, the community pharmacy consultation service uptake in January was about 350 appointments, and 255,000 appointments are done in primary care across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. So I think there are quite a big question. So I think are practices engaged in it? Yes. Are they being involved in it? Yes. Can it really translate into action points for the getting out of the framework? And we really got robust evidence to say that we can rely on primary care to fill some of those criteria, I think is a bit of a question for me, I think. And I think looking at the plan and the recovery steps, I don't think practices see themselves as part of the corporate arm of the ICB in terms of delivering things at certain timescales to fit in with the plans. So I think that probably requires a bit more of sort of socialisation and engagement with practices and PCNs about why, as a system, we're depending on some of these actions, and it's not just for improving patient care and access to primary care. It's about requiring, ticking some of the boxes to improve the system for NHS England.
Thank you. I suppose, and that's helpful, Julian. Thank you. I suppose what lies behind my question is a sense that may be shared by others, that maybe not, that as a board we don't spend nearly enough time talking about primary care, general practice, access and related issues. And this just triggered in my mind a thought about that we might want to think about further. Now, we've got the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, which has got statutory responsibilities, but there seem to have been a number of issues. I'm looking for Nick, about using that as a forum for debate about these strategically important issues. And I just welcome advice, if not now, that at a future meeting, about how are we going to make sure that issues relating to primary care, and add to that primary care in the broadest sense, dentistry, a discussion Gareth and I were having yesterday, optometry, but what's the other one? Pharmacy, how could I get pharmacy? We need to find a way of bringing these things together so we can look at them in a concerted way around this board table. Nick, have you any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the I in integration piece, isn't it? So the Primary Care Committee or Commission Committee is a formal subcommittee of the board. However, the place to have those conversations is in the Strategy Committee, and because it is strategic and everything interacts with each other. and I think that'd be a far better form to do it. And then, as well as regular reporting from the strategy committee, we could have individual standing items when something comes through, which is of big importance, acting to this board.
Cathy, you're nodding your head as chair of the strategy committee. You think that's the most appropriate route forward, do you?
It will certainly be a start, Chair, and I think it would give a broad view on primary care and associated clinicians that are aligned to primary care. At least it would get the ball rolling, and if it didn't fit quite with us, then we could say where else it might potentially go. But I can see it would not necessarily fit inside the primary care commissioning arm, which is all about contracts.
Now, I guess at a personal level, I'd be very happy with that, so long as the strategy committee is packed with GPs, optometrists, dentists, and pharmacists. Is it?
No.
So if that's a formal responsibility we want to give to the strategy committee, we've got to think about making sure the membership reflects that. Roger.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Nitty was here, she'd probably say that we've had discussion at the Primary Care Commissioning Committee around this whole area with Nick involved. And I think it's fair to say we haven't really resolved it yet. And I think it may go down to the GGI review, which we'll come on to later, about where does the source set. I don't think there's any easy answer, but clearly in terms of the primary care commissioning role, there is an overlap with what PCNs do and all this sort of stuff as well. So I think it needs a separate piece of work to bottom it.
And the Good Governance Institute are doing a review of some of our governance arrangements, including the functions of the different committees, and I don't know whether their brief extends to membership or not. But anyway, they ought to be helpful with this. But just I have a sense that we've got a bit of a vacuum here that we need to do something about as quickly as we can. Okay. Any other points? David Sidaway, on primary care or anything else from Simon's report?
I guess representing place, we'd be interested from a governance perspective if there was a window before submission for us to see the recovery plan. I'm speaking on behalf of Telford and Wrekin in that comment clearly before it's submitted, because it has significant implications for place and it's of interest.
Thank you. Meredith?
It might be evidence somewhere, but I don't think I've seen it. I think there are some practicalities around the commissioning of POD moving from NHS England to us and then on to Birmingham Sci-Health. And I'd be interested to know if those practicalities have been surfaced and what they might mean for some of our patients. And I'll give you an example. The complaints function that would have been held by NHS England presumably has gone somewhere else, probably to the hosting ICB, and I just wanted to be sure that our patients were being communicated with about that change and any other changes that might impact directly on them.
Sorry, Alison's just whispering something to me in response, Meredith. I apologise. Alison.
Sorry, Meredith, rather than take up the time here, I'm happy to circulate a briefing note to all board members and attendees just to let you know what's actually happening, how we're dealing with communications directly with patients. I can send that out this week. Okay.
I mean, at its simplest, what would be helpful, I guess, would be this is what has happened in terms of the out-of-system commissioning for POD. This is what will happen, and if there are any, these are the gaps. Something along those lines, Meredith, I guess we'd all find useful, wouldn't we?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Edna. Thank you. Any other points? Where am I looking? Roger, you wanted to come in again, and then I'll find others. Yeah. Sorry? Could somebody try and... Jane, our multi-purpose expert, will do her best to resolve the problem. Where was I? Roger, then Tina, and then Ian. And Trevor.
This is a question about POD, and I understand the response about centralising some of the work, but I think we mustn't lose sight of the opportunities with POD being delegated downwards, and also clarity around the governance as to what our responsibilities are in terms of financing and performance management.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if aspects of that are clearer than some of the other things that Meredith was alluding to, but let's check it out.
Well.
Let's check it out. Thank you. Now, where was I? Tina.
Thank you, Chair.
It's all a bit random, but I know you wanted to speak, and I know Ian wants to speak.
The item on premature mortality in adults living with severe mental illness, when you look at the slides, it's really harrowing reading, often linked to areas of deprivation. And I would support Simon's suggestion that that comes back as an agenda item, and we have a fuller discussion on that, because I think that's something that affects us all as a system in terms of the work that is being done and potentially the work that we need to do going forward.
Yeah, I think we'd all agree with that. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that there used to be, Nick, regular publications about mortality, excess mortality for many conditions. Now, maybe they still exist, but I haven't seen them, and I don't know that we've seen anything like that. Do they still?
It all exists. It's all digital. It's all accessible, and it's a question of knowing where to look and ask the right questions, and then presenting the data in the right format. So we used to, as I said many years ago, have the paper thing as a pamphlet printed out to us with the changes in mortality. It's there, and it's good data.
But presumably, if there was an issue of excess mortality, then you and your colleagues would make sure that it was drawn to our attention. Is that how it would work?
Yes. If we've got a specific question about a particular segment of care, we can find the information. Or if we've for some reason developed an outlier, we should be able to pick it up and notice.
Yeah, I suppose it's the surveillance of that data and telling us about where we are outliers, so that we're clear and that we can also debate what kind of a response we ought to provide. If you could give that some thought, and given the nature of the availability of the data, it's probably not too difficult to do that.
It depends on the detail and how fine a segment of care, whether it's the type of disease or the location as well.
Pat, could you give that some thought for us? That'd be helpful. Thank you. Ian, and then Trevor.
It's about going back to the GP recovery plan. GP since the pandemic has recovered or providing actually more appointments than pre-pandemic levels by 9 to 14% nationally. So my concern is it's not about the expansion of capacity. My concern would be the estate capacity. Historically, when a practice is run out of space, they either expand, have a new build, but it's about expansion. But in Telford and Shrewsbury, we are seeing significant increase in local population through the influx of new builds. Every week in the news, you hear about there's going to be 40 houses being built here and there, but there's no additional estate net to cater for primary care in the community. And this is going to be a major stumbling block, I foresee, in the next 5 to 10 years, unless we do something about that. And we know that the Section 106 money, there's currently no applications within Telford. I'm not sure about Shropshire, but I think that if there is money there, we need to make sure that we maximise the use of that.
Fair point. Anybody want to respond to that? Yeah.
Just on the Section 106 funding, so I think that's a point that's been previously raised by colleagues. So we've got the primary care team working. Sorry. In relation to the Section 106 and the cell funding, I think that's a point that's been previously raised. There definitely are significant submissions within the Shropshire Council, part of the county, and the primary care team are now working more closely with colleagues from Telford and Wrekin on the cell funding, which I think is the chosen route for Telford and Wrekin in terms of accessing more greater funding from the developments, but that's definitely work in progress.
But and that's a reasonable response, Gareth. What Ian's point begs is a question about the overall state of the primary care estate and a strategic view of how it is and what needs to change. And is that something for which we've got work underway? Is that what you said, or am I asking for more than that?
No. So the answer is a subset, effectively. So we're expecting scheduled for September the completion of a significant piece of work around the GP estate strategy that would be through the PCCC and arguably capable of coming to the board, which sets out the needs of all 51 practices within the county. Okay. That's not the same as having an answer to all 51 practices in the county, given the constraints around capital, but that certainly sets out the need.
Partial answer anyway. There is some thinking going on about that, clearly. That's helpful. Trevor?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I just want to go back and pick up on the digital strategy, because I agree with Simon. It's going to be an absolute critical component of the way forward for the ICS, ICB, that will transcend NHS into local authority, help us deliver what needs delivery now, but importantly help us deliver things differently in order to address many of the challenges that we've got. So the question really is, how do we embed that more into almost every conversation we have at the board and beyond in the committee structures?
Thank you. Nick?
I just agree with what we've just heard. I mean, it's central. If you look at all the opportunities we have going forward and so many of the issues related to quality, performance, finance, being digitally mature is vital. Part of the digital strategy, when you read it, talks about maturity assessments each of the ICS has had. We perform very badly. When you talk about digital, it's not just about the various systems we have across our organisations, it's about the infrastructure, and it's about the access to infrastructure. So there's a lot, and so much can be done to make the lives of people in Shropshire better by just continually pushing the digital agenda. There's not one answer to how we achieve that, but you're right, it's got to be right on the top layer, it's central to everything we do.
But if we take Trevor's really important point, it's a bit like the brief discussion we've had about primary care estate, really. We know there's an issue, that we know there's a challenge. We've got the outline of a digital strategy which looks highly relevant, pertinent. How do we lock it into the delivery of our objectives? How do we get to a position of being clear about the priorities for investment and the change mechanisms that we need to adopt to make sure that strategy really contributes to, for example, the local care programme? Any thoughts about that, Nick?
A massive decision, well, it's the behaviours of everybody gets to make decisions based on the board, in the committees and subcommittees. Many of the board papers have a box saying which the aims of the ICB does this reflect. We can add additional ones as we go along, but everybody just could be aware that it's such a big thing. But again, you mentioned the cost associated with it. Previously, people talked about digital, it's always about capital funding. Buying the kit and installing the PCs. Increasingly, so much of the cost is recurrent funding, as you buy an annual licence for the software packages. So it is going to be expensive. And then we'll bring us around to conversations about where's the best way to allocate our funding. I'm not answering the question again, I'm just highlighting the importance of it.
Thoughts, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, but and forgive me, this might be sort of going beyond my remit, but I almost feel we need a CIO sitting around the board tables so that every conversation we have someone nagging in our ear saying, digital can have a role in this.
It's an interesting observation. Of course, many boards have just that. I don't know how many ICB boards have a CIO, but I suspect many do. Is that something, Nick, Simon, that we've thought about?
So Masood, as well as being the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, my deputy, he is the interim CDIO, but in a way he sits at a level below an exec board member. Many other neighbouring ICBs do have an executive level CIO.
Well, I think, Trevor, we should pick up that challenge and we should ask our colleagues to give that some further thought. I presume it's the kind of thing that we could consider as part of the whatever shake-up we have to pursue as part of the running cost a bit. We've said we're going to have to think very carefully about our priorities and how they're resourced and how we organise accordingly. We might decide that having a CIO plus appropriate accoutrements is a bigger priority than we've thus far articulated. So I think it's reasonable, Nick. I hope you would agree.
Very reasonable suggestion, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Simon, you wanted to make one further point. Meredith.
I just wanted to be a bit troublesome. I don't actually think we need another person to say, why aren't we doing digital? I think everyone around this room should be saying, well, we can't do this without us being digitally capable. It's such a fundamental thing. It doesn't need another person. It needs us all to say, well, good idea, but we can't do it.
Well,
that's our challenge.
So there's a marginally counter view from Meredith, but let's leave the challenge with Nick about how we make progress on this front. I mean, Trevor's fundamental point is, here's a digital strategy. What do we have to do to implement it? What do we have to do to change mindsets and culture beyond buying tech and employing more people? And I think that's what the question begs, really. So if you can help us with that, Nick, that would be extremely useful. Simon.
Only just really quickly on the pod questions, just to come back in terms of that. So I think Meredith's question, I think in terms of what we communicated around the complaints and the changes in terms of that is really important. It would be easy to understand why colleagues might have missed this, but of course in the 25th of January board meeting, we signed off as a board all of the governance documents relating to that transfer of pod commissioning from NHSE to ICB. I can understand why we might not remember that immediately, it might not be at the front of our minds, but the papers are there in terms of the detail of that transition, that delegation and that move, and the governance supporting documents that sit behind it.
I'm still attracted to Alison's offer to synthesise the transfer of responsibilities and just make sure that we've got them boxed off. Sorry, Alison, not got off that.
But I think the complaints bit is separate because that wasn't at that point. So I think that's absolutely right in terms of that briefing point.
But I'm broadening the issue beyond just complaints. Are there other things that we need to be absolutely copper bottom clear about? Transferred responsibilities, and are we absolutely clear that we've got them covered? We might have.
Yeah,
we might have.
okay.
We might have. Okay, thank you. Moving on. The next item is the joint forward plan. We had a development session that Claire facilitated a little while ago now as part of the preparation of the joint forward plan. We've had a number of what we call big conversations with the public that Edna and her team and many others organised and contributed towards. So there's been quite a bit of discussion around this, and here's an opportunity to see where that has led us to thus far. So Claire will briefly present the plan. Claire will remind us that this is not the be-all and end-all. This is something which will be constantly revised. I mean, Claire and I talked the other day that there are aspects of it which already seem to need, to me and Claire, some not amendments, but some adjustment. And that's the way the plan ought to be. It's organic. So nonetheless, there's some important touchstones within there that we should be aware of. And we're going to listen to Claire, hand over to Claire and listen to what she has to say.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've probably said most of what I was going to say about the document, but I'll keep it short so you can get some time back. So I know a number of you have seen various iterations of the plan. I've cheated slightly, Kathy, that we've got version 11 as the final plan, but as you can imagine, there were several versions in between. And also I failed the challenge that was given to me by Nick and Simon to make it 40 pages. I tried desperately, but we are where we are. It's really difficult to try and include everything in the plan, but just a few reminders. This is a plan for the integrated strategy that was built off the back of the 2 health and wellbeing strategies, and all those plans align really well. In fact, we heard about the Telford plan, I think it was just last week, and it really, the new health and wellbeing strategy for Telford and Wrekin aligns really well to the integrated strategy and the joint forward plan. It was also really important not to duplicate lots of effort, and if you remember in March, I think it was a very heavily worded, 107 odd pages. So we have reduced it from that, and we have put a number of actions and ambitions into the plan. As Neil rightly says, as things keep moving, things like the workforce, the people plan, the national people plan will evidently feed into the JFP and hopefully improve it. And there are other pieces of work that we will need to build on as we go forward. I've tried to capture feedback from GP board, voluntary and community sector, children and young people, mental health, LDA, and we're still doing the engagement work, and that will also carry on feeding into the document, because that's going on till about September time for some of those seldom heard groups. So this is here today for publication by and after the 30th of June, but just because it's publication doesn't mean we stop working on it. So I won't say any more than that. I'll just open it out for questions.
There's a lot in the plan, and you're welcome to raise any questions for clarity. One of the things I'm interested in starting to explore with the board, however, is which are the big ticket items, not the term I really choose to use in this audience because we've not done terribly well with big ticket items in the past. Which are the big priorities? Which are the 2 or 3 sort of no-brainers, the things that we really believe passionately that we need to focus upon and around which everything fits? For example, the digital strategy. We might not get to the bottom of that over the next little while. We've all got our views about that, but I'd be surprised if we don't get a semblance of a consensus around that. So please raise points of clarity and give us some thoughts about priorities. Before we do that, though, I just want to ask Cathy, as chair of the strategy committee, if you've got any additional points by way of introduction that you wanted to make.
Just that the plans that as Claire has done, we've been through the various iterations. We've commended her for keep going at it. It's beginning to feel that it's coming together. We've tried to do the links between HTP and the local care programme, and we're going to have a further meeting with Nick to put the clinical strategy as an overarching piece across it, and I think that needs to come out more in the plan. But I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be thinking about the finance and the estates and primary care, but they were the 3 that come to mind and we focus quite a bit on with an enabler of workforce. But the 3 I would say is HTP, local care programme with the overarching clinical strategy.
Thank you. So there's an opener in terms of priorities, and it might be hard to disagree with them actually, but you're entitled to your views. Any other thoughts about the plan as it's currently written? Any parts of it that you think need more strengthening than others? And what are your thoughts about priorities? And if there's silence, then I'll start picking up people. Patricia.
I would absolutely agree that those are the priorities, but I would, given the Chief Exec responsibility for the local care programme sits with me, so absolutely on board with that as a priority. However, I think it's important to note that we are, with the wider integrated care system, looking at the local care transformation programme, what its key priorities are going to be for this year and the next few years, because actually the local care programme is an umbrella term for many different programmes of work that exist outside of the hospital, and we've got to stop saying out of hospital really, haven't we, because actually meeting the needs of people within communities is much broader than that. But we could be in danger with the local care programme of trying to boil the ocean and not focusing in on what the key priorities are within that. And so we're doing a piece of work, Lisa Keslick, who's the programme director, is doing a piece of work with all key partners around what the key focus of the programme will be over the next 12 months, whilst we still have we hope we still have the NHS improvement funding and the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. Any other comments? Neil Carr, what are your views?
I appreciate and respect the amount of work that's being done. It's been significant. That said, as a board, are we absolutely clear within the contents of that document what our priorities are? Because I don't think we can boil the ocean, as Patricia is suggesting, and I think we've got to be able to demonstrate how we're moving forward on the key clinical priorities. I think we need to engage with primary care more around that. I think long-term conditions, frailty, the elderly. I think these are issues that we've talked, Neil, about a lot of issues over a period of time, as we've discussed several times as an executive group. And I think the time is now right to actually say these are the 3 or 4 issues we're going to concentrate on, almost to the detriment of other issues. But it does require us to be harmonised. And my sense would be, at the moment, it's a document that we've got to really determine the priorities from.
Hence the stimulus I'm trying to encourage today to get into that. Trevor?
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't dare to suggest priorities, but I can't help myself comment that the almost final section on research and innovation very much seems as a bit of an afterthought and very undercooked. And yet again, I think we're going to really make a difference and change the way we do things over the next 5 years. That's going to have a bigger impact.
Thank you. And you might add to that discussion we've had previously, the workforce, the people section as well. That needs quite a bit of further thought and work as well. Simon, you want to?
I think it was Ian first.
Ian.
Thank you, Chair. We are a challenge system. I think the plan is sound. In terms of identifying priorities, personally, I think we need to identify areas of where the vicious cycles are in existence. We need to arrest the propagation of any vicious cycle in the system as a priority. Don't know what that is, but we have to identify those. And therefore, in that process, we can do it in synchrony with any transformation at the same time. It is to, for example, the backlog, elective backlog has got a lot of impact to general practice. At the same time, health and social care. So I think unless we were able to arrest the spiral down, we're going to have ongoing challenges that it's going to be very difficult to unpick.
Thank you. Tina, then Simon.
Thanks, Chair. I think in terms of the priorities, I think we've got to be careful to choose priorities that cut across all of the system, rather than ones that perhaps are too health focused or too local authority focused. I think our priorities should be collective ones. And I also think we might benefit from having 2 or 3 key enablers. I'm thinking of the development of place and neighbourhoods and so on, that then would support those priorities. So I'm not really helping in identifying anything specifically, but I just think we need priorities that cut across all of the system, and 2 or 3 key enablers. And for me, the development of place and neighbourhoods would be one of those.
Thank you. Thank you for your reminder about the enablers, because sometimes we don't give them the attention they deserve. So thank you for that. I'll come back to that in just a moment, if I may. Have we got Meredith?
Thank you very
Harry,
much.
and then Simon. You've patiently been waiting to...
I'll be quick. Just wanted to congratulate Claire and everyone involved in it. It's a very, very good piece of work. With the outreach into communities has been great, and I'm sure we've got lots of inputs from people who wouldn't normally get involved in these kinds of things. So that's great. I really think we need to maximise the benefits of us being an integrated care system. And it does always strike me that the largest proportion or the biggest part of our integrated care system are the people who live here. So my focus would definitely be around people's health, and if we can focus on prevention, and I love the fact that it comes out strongly in the plan. Certainly love the conceptual basis of person-centred. This is about people as people, not as patients. I think that's a really strong point. Totally agree with Neil. We probably need to think about what we don't do as much as what we do. And the other thing, which is probably there, but I couldn't see it, is how we're going to arrange our finances to support it.
Yep, really important points. And let me just bring in Claire at this point. The financial component of the plan, how do we organise our finances to support it? What kind of mechanisms do you want to see deployed in the short term to think about how we distribute our resources differently to help deliver the priorities we've been talking about? What are your thoughts?
Well, the plan actually starts to build the framework from which I can hang some numbers on from a financial perspective. So rather than me, that's a very royal we, my team producing a model that purely sits around money, we need it to be absolutely grounded in activity, in workforce information, and really highlight the ambitions that we've got over 5, 10 plus years. So we're developing some work over the summer around an integrated demand, capacity and finance model, which will very much be available to support that work. But that's only as good as what we feed into it, so I'm very much reliant on all of the partner organisations to help feed into that to really give us a good grounding for that modelling. We can then build scenarios, we can test our priorities with that, do all that good stuff to help us move forward.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. Now, although I think probably Simon's had his hand raised longer than Julian, I heard Julian sigh when I missed him before, So Julian, and then Harry, but Harry didn't sigh quite as loudly as Julian. So.
A question to Simon yourself, really. I mean, we've got a lot of plans, and it's how are we going to effectively report them back to the board? And also, is there any read across or any simple document that shows us how the integrated system improvement plan aligns with the joint forward plan? And which, because surely that possibly may drive some of the targets in the joint forward plan. Above and beyond that, around the prioritisation and the disprioritisation, or the you know, I suppose the question is, what process are we planning to have that? Are we planning to have something, just an academic exercise based on the information that's presented to us, or are we actually going to engage with the public and ask them what they think we ought to prioritise on? And that clearly ties into the financial plan, because we can, you know, I can quite easily go shopping for new cars and, you know, identify a Ferrari or Land Rover to buy, but my money probably stretches to something less than that. And I think that's the Fiesta. Yes, I think they're being stopped being produced. So that's probably an apt example. So I suppose the question is, surely we, you know, in what order do we do it, and how do we do that prioritisation? And is there a process that we have in mind for that, or how do we establish a process?
It's a really good point. I mean, if we're not careful, we're going to drown in a sea of plans and details within them. So therefore, this discussion about prioritisation, how we go about it, how we keep it under scrutiny is very important. And again, I feel a piece of work coming in the direction of the strategy committee, Cathy, which I might try and summarise in a moment or two. Simon, did you want to come in, or Harry? You're going to give Harry...
Mr. Simon.
Yes. All I can hear you, you're right next to me.
It's just a quick point, which you've just touched on around the number of plans and how we get to priorities. And I think what we have to remember as well is that the ICS has got 4 key priorities, and we've got to make sure that whatever we do is aligned to them and balance between what's important and what's urgent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, thank you. Now, who else have I missed? Who else is sighing? Andy.
No sign involved. If I just bring together a few comments I think that I've heard around the table, and probably synthesise some more work that's been going on elsewhere that many of you will be aware of. So within the Shropshire plan, in terms of those 4 healthies that we're working towards, there's one major work stream called Breaking Generational Cycles. I think it really speaks to what we're talking about this afternoon. And that's, in basic terms, that's opportunity to reduce demand on our services, but at the same time improving outcomes for our residents. And it speaks, as the title suggests, interventions that will prevent generation after generation becoming dependent or reliant on our services and unnecessary contact with our services. And whilst that reduces demand, reduces cost, it improves outcomes. So I think a focus around there. It's just trying to bring together some of those comments and just make that point, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else? Go on, Simon.
So all really helpful conversation and discussion. I would echo the thanks that Meredith made in terms of Claire and team and colleagues that have been involved with Edna and others. I'll miss somebody out and offend somebody now, but in terms of the way the team have worked and providers and local authorities, voluntary sector, Health Watch have supported, just really appreciate that commitment to get the plan where it is. I think just some context really quickly is let's, the joint forward plan is the equivalent of us updating the long-term plan that was there previously. The key for us is, has it got the right hooks in that we can then look at and say, these are the areas that we want to focus on? Because there's a risk we try and reprioritise everything over and over again. We've got a 12-month operational delivery plan for this year that we need to focus on. The priorities are clearly set in there, and we need to make sure that we deliver against that. The key bit is, how do we evolve and make sure then we get into the medium-term financial planning, the view in terms of what happens next year and what happens the year after that, rather than the 12-month cycle of the planning. And so the question on the design and the architecture of the system is a really good one, but actually let's set that out and say, is the hook in the joint forward plan to say we need to do that piece of work? I think it is. So then it's how do we then take that piece of work forward to get into place and to get into the conversation that we had at the last in the last board development session piece. So I just at risk, I just don't want us to go down the track of thinking we've got to prioritise everything again when we've already got an operational delivery plan for this year, and we'll continue to do that. I think our challenge as we get into planning for 24-25, how do we make sure we reference back to the joint forward plan and the integrated system improvement plan, and we align the joint forward plan. The joint forward plan was aligned with the two health and wellbeing strategies as well. So there's a read across in terms of there and a connection, a link already. It's now, how do we use the hooks to drive our delivery on our operational plan in year, rather than keep going around the circle of, please can we come up with another set of priorities? Otherwise we'll do nothing.
Well, I don't think anybody's suggesting we have another set of priorities. I think what we're saying is there's an operational plan which we have to focus on for the delivery, its delivery this year. But if you're producing a joint forward plan which is taking a longer term view of our strategy, if you like, it's an appropriate opportunity to reflect on that which we've said previously and ask ourselves whether those priorities are still what we want to do. And to that extent, I think having this discussion has been very helpful, and I presume that we need to have an emerging view of our priorities as we start getting into discussions about our commissioning intentions for next year and beyond. My thoughts are not entirely by any means at odds with yours, Simon. I think we're saying pretty much the same kind of thing. And my suggestion is, if you agree, if the board agrees, is that we ask Claire to support the strategy committee to give us some thoughts about how these things fit together and try and explain them to us. I think Julian's point is a really important one. There'll be minds around this table who will understand that graphically. Many of us are struggling to just know exactly how it all knits together, firstly. The second thing is, give us some thoughts about priorities. Remind us about the things that we've said before and ask us and tell us whether you think they're still germane or not. One thing we are clear about, if you take the priorities in the system improvement plan, the priorities in the joint forward plan, the priorities in the integrated care strategy, it's impossible to begin to think how we can do them all justice. So strategy committee, help us with a synthesis of that. And picking up Tina's point, please help us understand the enablers and their priorities, because they're all important, but some of them, I'm sure we would argue, are more important than others. And then there's a broader discussion about how do we organise as a board to oversee the implementation of our plans and our priorities. Are our governance arrangements at the moment in the committee substructures adequate for that purpose? Question, they may be. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. So those are my suggested actions as a result of that discussion. And I would echo everybody else's comments for Claire and her team and contributors. It reads well. It's an impressive piece of work. But my goodness me, there's even more to be done in terms of its implementation, as we've been saying. So well done, everybody. Okay.
I don't want to prolong the debate, Chair, but our priority should be driven by the data that's the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment that tells us what our population needs are, and our work plan falls out of that with the hooks that we've got in and what the population attends. That's where we need to keep grounded in terms of the work that we do.
Don't think you and I are disagreeing about that at all.
I was happy to agree with my Chair.
Good. It's appraisal time, isn't it?
It is appraisal time, Chair. Yes. I
agree with you entirely. No, I get that point entirely, and there's no question of trying to reinvent wheels. It would be a nonsense, an absolute nonsense. But we've got so many wheels at the moment. I think most of us are struggling to understand which ones we should be. Give me an analogy that I can use with wheels. No, I can't think of one. Claire.
I just wanted to say that we have worked really hard to make sure that the JFP does align with the system improvement plan, the operational planning, the financial plans, and that all the strategies align, including working with colleagues in SAF and Shropcom to make sure that all the local care plans and the HDP plans align to this plan, and actually the health and wellbeing strategies as well, as that I mentioned before. So it is all starting to come together.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Well done, Claire. Cathy, we look forward to further advice from your committee in time. Thank you very much indeed. As we've been reminding ourselves, we already have an operational plan for this year, and we had a discussion about it at the last meeting and said that Julie and Claire would give us an update today. Julie sends her apologies, incidentally. I should have referred to those earlier. So the floor is yours, Claire.
Thank you. And what Julie and the team have tried to do is combine a couple of things into one place. So I know at the last meeting we had some questions about, well, how do we actually operationalise all the things that were in this huge plan that we signed off? And also a very valid question about, and so what? What does it mean for our patients? This only works if it has a positive benefit for the patients, and we need to see that quite clearly. So what we've tried to do through the paper is just boil down each of the core areas of the operating plan, give a bit of a flavour of what's in there, but also to give a sense of the so what in terms of the benefits and the impact that we're looking to see. One of the things that we do highlight in the paper is one change that occurred post-submission of the plan, and that was in the finances, and I talked Finance Committee through that yesterday. We submitted a plan with a £60 million deficit as a system. After that submission, we were notified that some funding had been released from the national team that previously we didn't think was going to be unlocked to us as a deficit system, but it was. So £2.9 million was actually added into our allocation as part of the wrap-up process. Not for us to spend, I hasten to add, but to actually try and improve our position and give us a little help towards that elusive break-even that we have for the moment. So in future finance plans moving forward, you won't see a plan of 60 million, it will be 57.1 million, which is not quite as nice a round number to remember, but never mind. Just wanted to pull out some of the headlines really from the paper in terms of next steps, because I wanted just to highlight to the board the huge amount of work that Julie and her team have been doing in the background to provide really helpful data and packs to our programme boards. So this isn't just about ticking a box and producing some graphs and saying this is what's happening. We're trying to produce a data set that can be actively used, proactively used by each of the programme boards so they can see whether the work that they're doing is having the impact that we anticipated it to have. We shared a first summary dashboard from all of those data sets with the Integrated Delivery Committee earlier this month, which I'm looking at Harry, but I think it was very well received by the members. We know there's still some more work to do, but we're definitely building that, and we are trying to pull in more and more data sets as we go to make that as rich a set of information as possible. We're also looking to develop a more public-friendly summary of the plan. Let's be honest, what we submitted is very NHS-y, filling boxes with narrative. We want something that's meaningful and that people can actually understand and connect with in terms of what that means for them. We're very much going through a lessons learned process from the whole of the planning round, There's lots of lessons to be learned, and that's all helpful in terms of us now preparing for 24, 25 and beyond. This isn't a static exercise that we want to do once a year. This is something that we're creating now into a rolling programme, and particularly, as I've already mentioned, the demand and capacity and finance model that we're looking to develop. It means that we've got a far more flexible and responsive means of testing out some of the things that we're doing to have a look at it. I think the final thing to say is just touching back on the finances and the delivery point that we've talked about, and it's come up a couple of times in conversation already. The finances are dependent on us being successful in the delivery of the actions that we said that we'd set out to do. So one of the things that we're suggesting we do sooner rather than later is come together as executives, non-executives, probably an extension to this board, but get a few key people together to really make sure that we're clear about the scale and the extent of the ask that we've got for this year, because it's a huge plan that we need to deliver. It's ambitious, which is absolutely what it should be, but it's not without its risks. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing, and we can update as we go, but is definitely bringing that group of people together, because we are a system as we sit here and as we sit as a board, but I'm also conscious that we have individual responsibilities for our own organisations. So it'd be really helpful just to get views from others to make sure that we're really getting behind that. I'll pause there, but I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Again, a huge amount of work has gone into this. It seems as if our governance arrangements for tracking progress are better developed this year than they have been in the past, which is gratifying. Harry, did you want to make any comment about it?
Firstly, the data set is proved very helpful in sort of just going straight to the point. Focusing a bit on the finance, Claire and I have spoken about this sort of session. I think it would be really helpful. I don't know whether it should be an extension of this board or a smaller, more focused group. I don't know. I mean, I kind of think we want the right people in the room focused. I think it would have to be about, at the end of the day, so what's going to happen now, not just a talking shop and we all go back to business as usual. And then the final thing is that we talked at the delivery committee about, as part of this focus, the delivery committee taking a deep dive into areas. I mean, we've said it weekly if we have to, just to try and get some grip. That was a word that was in the NHS about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it, grip, on this. So I think I would suggest, without tying Claire, that by our next meeting, we will have done something.
Yeah.
Either one or both of those activities. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further points? Katrina?
Thank you. And I totally agree with Claire. The money will only fall out of delivery of the performance metrics. And therefore the performance metrics must be at the forefront of our thinking. The one consideration to the deep dives that Harry's suggesting is to remember that the organisations, each individual organisation is probably doing this to death anyway. So it's how do we ensure that we are building upon that activity rather than duplicating and potentially diverting people's attention away from, because believe it or not, one more reporting line is probably not going to be overly favourable. So it's just to make sure that it really is value adding and building upon what's already been done. The last piece is really for in terms of the summary papers that are coming to this board, I wonder if it'd be worth considering how we're actually reporting them against the RAG rating. So for example, we're reporting them RAG rating green, and yet it's the beginning of the year. So I'm just wondering if there's value actually looking at a RAG rating that's, we accept the fact it's not yet delivered because it's not so red, but we actually do put it against a trajectory. So it's not yet delivered, but we're on plan, rather than green, which could actually mean anything and can unfortunately hide an awful lot of sins underneath the colour scheme. So it's just a suggestion that there might be a more transparent way to put performance.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I agree about looking at the activity to drive the finance. We haven't worked through the detail of this, but my view would be what we don't do is sit down in a room and say what went wrong last month. But we should look forward and say where's that going to take us, because the financial profile for this system is scary, and the sooner we start looking forward, the sooner we'll have clarity around where we're going. So I think these deep dives will be a forward look, not a backward look.
Thank you. Simon wants to come in, but any other contributions?
Roger, one question. Very good paper, and clearly the articulation of this into data and finance will be hugely important as we get through the year. I notice primary care is mentioned in paragraph 3.6, but it doesn't seem to be covered in the programme board. And we've heard a lot today about developments in primary care with the recovery programme, etc., etc. Is the intention to have a primary care programme board as part of this process?
We don't have a primary care programme board, but we have elements of primary care data that will be used in the dashboards for the relevant committees. So, for example, some of the activity that supports some of the urgent and emergency care work programme, that will be reported in the right place. I know also that Julie's got an intention to develop a dashboard for the primary care commissioning committee, so that's also something that we'll look to introduce, but it's dependent on the data that we can pull in to be able to do that.
Yeah, I perhaps emphasise the point that as an ICB and an ICS, we're very keen on promoting primary care and all the benefits of developing and investing in that service, and I just think there's a bit of a gap there.
Yeah, that's an echo really of the discussion we had earlier. So perhaps Claire, Simon, we could ask you just to rethink that bit of it. I think that, does it sit with the elective care and other responsibilities that you carry, Stacey, or have I misread that?
There's elements that touch.
Of course there are.
Of
course there are. Yeah.
I think it's then we go back to the metrics dashboard, but the membership of them groups to be able to drive that work forward. My other point on the RAG rating, because I agree, I think it was more around we have a plan to deliver that performance target as opposed to we're on track to. But within the dashboards that the teams are busy working on, we've made a real point that we have that forward look. We can't talk about what's going on with it. It's ensuring we're ahead of the game.
Is there a doctor in the house? It's a minted period. Yeah.
Okay. I think the message is clear. Let's just have another look at the primary care component of the plan in terms of the programme management arrangements and see if we want to strengthen it. Julian?
Yeah, just a bit. I'm not sure.
We've seen more activity than years ago. So I think there's a lot of access issues. Some of those are about broader societal issues and funding issues around that. But I'm not sure where it sits separately from this different issue.
And I mean, I presume that's a kind of discussion that led to it not being a separate programme. But given the points that have been raised, could you just have another look at that and give it a little further thought? Talk to Julian and Ian in some more detail. Cathy and Patricia.
I just wanted to support Katrina, that I think it's much better to start with red at the beginning of the year and watch it go green, rather than start green and get utterly disappointed by going red by the end of the year. As an NHS ex-manager, that's where I think, and also that will help focus minds as well.
Yep. Good point. Patricia?
I mean, I do think we need to look at how we look at primary care data, because it's so pivotal and important to other aspects and delivery in other parts of the system. Absolutely take the point that primary care is seeing a huge amount of activity. I could argue that my organisation is financially stable, it has been financially stable, etc., etc. However, what we do know is that we've still got huge inequalities and health inequalities across our society. So there are still too many people that rock up to A&E and get their diagnosis of cancer at that point rather than being screened and coming through a primary care route. Access is still in it. So there's a lot more that can be done. So whilst primary care is doing an absolute cracking job under enormous pressure and growing demand, we have to work differently. And I think having sight of data and information, not in a blame game way, but in the how do we shift the dial in a different way, a bit like the conversation we had about resources and how we therefore need to plough in resources into certain areas, is an important one. And without seeing that in the round and that data, it's really, really difficult to be able to deploy resource and bring resource together effectively and collectively.
A number of powerful points, actually. So again, Claire, Sandy, if you could bear all of those things in mind as you deliberate that topic, that would be greatly appreciated. Well done, Julie, Claire and others in producing this. We're clear about the programme boards, primary care, question mark. We're clear about who's the lead for each. You've shared those with us. We asked previously for advice about the benefits within the plan. I think, Roger, you were pretty strong on that. There's a good section about benefits, I felt, within this, so well done for that. We've talked about the next steps. I understand people's reservations about not overcooking a kind of grand board meeting for discussing this, but I am attracted to the idea of at least a number of us getting together and talking with the programme board leads about the progress and the tribulations and the risks associated with the work and how collectively we might be able to assist with unblocking them. So from that point of view, Claire, if you could organise that, and I know something that Trevor's very interested in as well, that'd be brilliant. Thank you. Now, our next item, last item before a break, is the LEDER annual report. Alison Bussey.
So, the leader, just call it that, the leader annual report. I think everybody should be aware of the requirement for us to do this. It's really important to note that the key principles of this programme, which is overseen nationally, is to improve the care for people with a learning disability and autistic people. It's to reduce health inequalities for people who have a learning disability or are autistic, and to prevent people dying early. So it's really, really important. And within the report, I think I just want to highlight the collective causes for death, which are cancer, dementia, respiratory and neurology-related conditions. There's some really good practice that has been identified as well, which I just wanted to make reference to. And I'm particularly pleased to see that the issue of familiar staff members available to support an individual during hospital admission and stay, that is really, really important. The fact that MDT discussions are held where best interest decisions are made, and access to specialist consultants and nurses where individuals have complex physical health issues. And also to note the progress that has been made in the last year, particularly the rollout of the Oliver McGowan training across the system for level 1. Really, really important. And there's more besides, but you can see that for yourself in the report. However, there's still work to do. There is still work that needs to happen around the annual health checks and the health action plans. There are inconsistencies, so there definitely needs to, that will be a focus of work over this next year. Reasonable adjustments being used wherever the person is receiving care or support. There's more work to be done there. And full use of hospitals as well. Healthier lifestyle support not being considered, particularly around obesity. Really important area to focus on as well for this group of people. And the improved use of the Mental Capacity Act. So none of those things that I just mentioned there are rocket science. Those are really, really clear areas of focus. One of the things that will now happen is that this will be part of the LDNA work programme, which was referred to in Claire's paper just now. So that will happen, but I would also want to see that within other programmes of work, particularly around those physical health conditions and cancer, respiratory, neurology, that we absolutely need to see that this group of people and those with serious mental illness are a focus of that work as well. So it's about, for me, it's about how we integrate and across. So that is all I wanted to highlight, other than to ask the board if they could agree to this, because we need to submit this by the end of the week. There's been several opportunities for many, many different people to input to this and see it, including the Quality and Performance Committee membership. And tomorrow we have the Quality and Performance Committee where it will be discussed then as well.
Thanks, Alison. Neil Carr, anything you'd like to contribute to this?
I was fortunate that I spent last Thursday with the National Director for LD&A, Tom Carhill. And I think Tom recognised the significant progress that had been made across the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, Staffordshire system. But one of the things he asked me to try and put further onto the radar, Neil, was we shouldn't necessarily be making specific allowances for people with LD per se and having very specific policies, but rather we should be embracing the needs of people with LD into every policy or every service we're operating. So I think it's true to say we're getting better. Certainly the organisation I represent knows where it needs to up its game. But I think the request is organisations should be thinking about people with LD to try and embrace them into their generic services, because I think by developing precise services, we're isolating people. I think that was the key message.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other comments? Any local authority views on this subject?
Yeah, I think I'd welcome those comments from Neil in terms of that's exactly how we need to address this issue.
Yeah, good.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I think I must be in your blind spot today.
I have a number of those at the moment.
You need to sigh louder.
Yeah, sigh louder. Sigh.
As somebody who's done the Oliver McGowan training, I would recommend it. So if people have access to it and haven't done it, I think people should do it, because it's a brilliant piece of training, and really it's delivered from people who themselves have got a learning difficulty or autism, and it's very, very powerful, so I'd recommend that. And I think it would be useful for the board to have an update on progress with the recommendations at some point, rather than wait for 12 months for the next level report. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you. Julian.
Probably we were remiss not to take the opportunity to ask something about the provision of the Tier 2 on training. I know it's like not within the grasp of the ICB, but obviously Tier 1 training is the online training followed by a session, which Tier 2 is for people that contact we need to do an online module and a whole day module. In theory, we either do Tier 1 or Tier 2, which is separate trainings, but there isn't a Tier 2 training scheme available. I don't think any ICB as well as Tier 2 training scheme. So just how do we flag that and highlight that nationally, that it's time to make a requirement for admission to be Tier 2 training, because no Tier 2 training we do. How does that happen, and how does that sit with CQC? In fact, provide when they can access evaluation of Tier 2 training.
So if I can start to answer that, I can't give you the full answer. Just about to pilots in Tier 2 training, there is a massive requirement for people with lived experience to produce and deliver that training. And that will be the biggest challenge that we have, is how you can develop that significant cohort of people who are wanting to deliver training. It's a big ask. And so that's why we're starting small. There will be a resource issue as well, of course, that will need to be funded. We need venues, etc. But there is part of the plan. We work jointly with the authority on that. Does that answer?
I think it came with this morning the GP over house for discussion. It begins to. I mean, there is a requirement for us to do Tier 2 training for everyone here. to approach them to and there's no tier 2 training. So I think it needs to be funded by the ICB and understanding that our mindset needs to be set, needs to have lived experience to multiple presenters and course organisers. I can see that is a stumbling block, but it is a national requirement, so there needs to be a plan to have tier 2 training available for consumers and appropriate contact with patients and processes.
It goes back to we're piloting it, and that will be evaluated, and then we've got to determine just how many people that we are going to be able to support to co-produce and deliver the training.
Thank you. We're asked to approve the report. Is everyone content with it? Are you able to approve it? Thank you very much indeed. Well done, Alison, and everyone else involved in its production. We now have a 10-minute break. Enjoy. microphones, because some people aren't doing that and others are finding it difficult to hear. That probably includes me as well. Thank you, Alison. So if you could try and do that for me, please, I'd be very grateful. Back to the agenda. We're moving into system governance and performance. And the first item on the agenda is the Integrated Care System Performance Report. Julie Garside, who isn't here, but I think, Claire, you are dealing with this. Can I just say, I thought this was really well organised. So congratulations to the authors and the presenters. But the way it felt as if it was integrated. And I know there's more work to be done with it, but well done. That's the first point I wanted to make. But over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, and I'll make sure to pass that on to the team. I know they've put a lot of time into thinking about how we start to pull this together. I was going to just make the point that this is our first redesigned report that now captures quality information as well as the other strands that we've been pulling in previously. But actually, we're trying to make the report more well-rounded rather than it feeling like we've just stuck different elements together. There's still some reflections within the team on what we might do differently and how we might improve this, and we'll be looking for some feedback after we've used this style of report a couple of times just to make sure that it's providing the information that we want. So just a couple of headlines really that I wanted to pull out from the report, and then I'm happy to field any questions and hopefully with the support from colleagues if there's anything too technical that I don't know the answer to. As the report highlights, as we sit here reporting, looking back over the first 2 months of the year, the two significant pressures that we do need to bring to the board's attention are urgent and emergency care and the financial position. I don't think that comes as a surprise to people, but I think it's really important that we draw attention to those. For urgent and emergency care, we have seen some improvements. Ambulance handovers is cited in the report, and particularly with the opening of the ambulance receiving areas at both sites, the ARAs, that has given us some improvements there. But we know we're struggling in other areas, and particularly around the 4-hour target, which is now failing to meet trajectory that we'd set. From a finance perspective, we're at month 2 already at a £4 million deficit for the system. Now it's early in the year, so we're forecasting that we'll recover and we'll hit our trajectory. But as we've already heard through some of the discussion that we've had today, we have a number of priorities in our system. We've got some significant risks around delivery of the work programme, and obviously if those risks manifest and crystallise in delivery, then they fall through into our numbers as well. Of the 4 million that we're off target, one of the key drivers of that number is our agency expenditure, and particularly linked to the cost of escalation in SAF. So we've got a combined effort here that we really need to get round as a system. SAF have their own actions that they're undertaking internally, particularly focusing on things like the simple discharges and their processes to tighten up how patients flow through the hospital. But there's also system responsibility with other partners in terms of supporting that. So whether that's through delivery of the virtual ward beds that I know Patricia and team are supporting, through some of the discharge activities and work with the local authorities. So that's a significant area of concern. Just to flag as well, when I'm talking about risk for the finances, I've mentioned it in the context of month 2, but we also need to look at it in the context of the year overall. So we know we set ourselves a really challenging plan. We know we've got a long way to go till we get to month 12. So the positive of that is there's time to get back on track and there's time to deliver what we've got. But we also know that the efficiency programme that we've set ourselves is backloaded in the year. So quite bluntly, months 1 and 2, we've been quite easy on ourselves in terms of how much delivery we're anticipating in the plan. That's going to get tougher as the months progress, so we can't afford to let other things slip as well, because we've got a lot of focus to put into those areas, which is why I'm quite heartened by the discussion we had before the break about how do we turn our attention to some of this and make sure that we're doing the right things in the right places. They're probably the key headlines that I wanted to draw out. Apologies that we've now got a gap in the people data because we've had some information withdrawn, but just to give assurance that the team are working on that to make sure that we can provide something that's meaningful for next time.
Thank you. Let's open this up for discussion. Patricia, your hand's raised.
I think on the urgent care agenda, I think we all recognise the enormous kind of pressures, and we also recognise the plan that we put together in terms of delivery, particularly in how we get out of some of the escalation areas within SAF to enable delivery of the financial plan. I think some of the schemes that we've got aren't the wrong schemes, and in fact they are delivering, and I think it's important to note that, because whilst we're behind plan, actually we've seen a huge step leap, particularly around the virtual ward, which is a joint piece of work between ourselves and SAF and the wider system, around the step down patients into the community discharged from SAF onto the virtual ward, and we are on trajectory, the agreed trajectory with NHS England, and confident to deliver the 249 beds by December. And we've received quite a lot of national media and other interest in relation to that, which is really, really positive. That's helping with the recruitment as well. It's one of the key areas, certainly within my workforce, where we've seen a 5% increase in recruitment, because they're attractive jobs that allows people to expand their skills. So I think it's, whilst looking at this plan, looks on one hand not bleak, I think we also need to change the narrative slightly in terms of we are delivering. Certainly the virtual ward is a huge critical cultural change, and it takes time to build team, the team skill and spirit around that, which we are doing, and we are doing at pace. So I think there's a balance between the narrative as well as, so we're a little bit behind plan, but do we have the confidence, and what do we need to do to make up the difference between X and Y? That's an important point that I wanted to raise, because what I don't want is to lose that momentum from teams that feel very buoyant in what they're achieving right now.
Thank you, Patricia. Other comments? Harry?
Can I ask a specific question of one of some of the data? We've talked a lot about primary care today, and so I was interested in the primary care data. And I guess on the one hand, I look at I'm on page 9. On the one hand, I look at the bottom left and I see the number of GPs increasing, but over that very same period, the number of appointments seemed to have gone down, and it just didn't seem to make any sense to me. You know, I was just wondering if there was a reason for it.
Can I pick that up?
Yep.
I suspect it's down to whole-time equivalents, and the GPs aren't working full-time.
Well, it says full-time equivalents on the chart. The increase in GPs, it says full-time equivalents.
The amount of appointments has gone up. Are we looking at the face-to-face or virtual?
All of them, to be honest. All of them. The face-to-face and virtual have gone down significantly. The 2 weeks and same or next day have kind of drifted a bit, but then just leaps out.
Yeah. I can ask the team to provide a statement on that specifically to map what's driven the changes and why they don't appear to correlate. There'll be a reason, but we just need to explain it.
I do think the urgent appointments have gone down because they've changed over the last year, moving back towards face-to-face. And it will be lower because of the volume of working days, I guess, really.
I don't know, just left out to me, so that doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, look, I think on the first page, just highlight overall appointments are higher. I think full-time equivalence also includes GPs in training as well, so I think it does include different metrics that include different needs of GPs.
Simon?
Is it not just because the numbers are really small? Because actually you're talking about a change of 4 people against 154,000 appointments. So I think the scales on the graphs are perhaps very unhelpful.
They don't help, but the scale on the graphs and the GPs, it's been drifting down as appointments have been going up, and it's reversed.
And so I think the numbers going down. So I think that's fair in terms of making sure we understand where that's at. So I think the numbers are small in terms of the numbers of GPs in and out against a trend of where are the appointments going, and then there's been an anomaly that's dropped off in the past month But equally, that month would have been Easter as well and the first bank holiday. But let's get the explanation that sits behind it. But for my first impression, Harry, would be small numbers of GPs changes, overall appointments relatively flat with a drop 1 month. But I think I'd probably put that down to Easter. But let me get the detail.
Katrina?
And just thanks to Claire and the team with regards to the development of the integrated report. But it does go, the conversation we've just had indicates to me that perhaps the next stage in development is the build of the narrative that goes aligned with the data, and the subsequent step is then, and what are we doing about it?
Yes.
But we do have to recognise that the trajectory of the learning, or the development, if you like, of the report. And so I just want to thank Claire and the team for doing that. I did have something else, but I've forgotten it, sorry.
Well, whilst you think about that, let me ask, are there any other points that people want to raise? Roger?
Yeah, I think this is a very good start. I think just picking up Katrina's point, I think it's useful to have a bit of narrative around each of the graphs just to explain why the trend is adverse, and then a section saying what can we do about it, just to bring it all together. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted just to spend a few minutes having a look at slide 20, I think it is, page 20, the month 2 finance position. We're showing a 4 million-ish variance. It's early, but we're showing, or we're declaring, that we're still on track to deliver our plan at the year end. Trevor, your finance committee will have been thinking about this avidly, I've no doubt. Have you any observations, any thoughts that you want to share with us at this point?
I guess just two. One, which I think Claire's already mentioned, that if anything, it's going to get harder rather than easier as we go through the year because of the way we profiled the efficiency savings, and so that I think brings some stronger along better to go on. Also, yesterday, so not.
You're breaking up, Trevor.
Oh, sorry.
That's better. Yeah, it is. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So the issue that things are going to get harder because of the way we profile the efficiency savings, I think, is a key one. So that the figure now is sort of more worrying than if that profiling had been more linear. So definitely worth worrying about. But yes, we talked just a little bit about the agency side of it, which is clearly a major chunk of that 4 million deficit. And we heard how effectively each of the trusts is really getting on top of that in terms of the numbers. But a little bit of a debate as to whether there needs to be a cross-system debate as to whether there's anything more strategic we do across the system around the whole issue of agencies and their use and how they're paid and everything else, which we heard that 1 or 2 other areas are thinking about. So that was just literally from yesterday's meeting.
Thank you. Any comments from chief executives or their representatives about that point about system-wide view of agency employment, deployment and cost? Any thoughts? Katrina?
Probably going to say the same as Simon was probably thinking about saying. So there is a piece of work that is being done across the system already, and accepting the fact that the majority of the agency volume actually sits within SAF, and the majority of the agency pound sits within SAF as well. So we are very involved in looking at that. A lot of work has already been done in terms of rationalising the level of framework agency usage to the point that, if I remember rightly, it's now only actually within one division, one part of our organisation, paediatrics, I think.
Paediatrics.
Everything else is now, we've come on framework, so we're moving on to the next stage of development, which is about the e-rostering and making sure that we shift as much away from comparatively last minute. But this is, I'm saying SAF, but this piece of work is actually being done across the board, across the whole system. It just feels like it's SAF because we've got the majority of the volume and we're taking a lead on it, and we're also carrying the majority of the risk on it. But the other thing in relating to that is, I think as part of the conversations that we're talking about for performance, I think it's really important that we actually map out the potential trajectory of the risk as well, particularly around the potential gap between the assumptions that we've got in, particularly around escalation, agency use of escalation, etc., and the risk that we could be carrying if those assumptions don't come into being, because that's going to be the over and above on the deficit. And if there was one criticism that came out quite loudly last year from Finance Improvement from NHSE, it was a case of, well, we got the sense you didn't know it was happening. I think it would be exceptionally good, one, that we actually achieve the 58.3
57.1.
57 point whatever the new number is going to be. But two, if we aren't going to achieve that number, we can actually have a trajectory of what the extent of the risk is, and therefore the actions that must be taken to mitigate as much as possible.
Thanks.
And that conversation we talked about earlier will very much play into that.
Interesting comments, Katrina. I think Claire and Simon want to come in. Which of you wants to go first?
I can respond specifically on the risk point.
Mm-hmm.
So we do some work each month when we produce the position to have a look at what the financial risk is. Now, I make no bones about the fact that it's hard pounds. It's not the broader narrative around risk to patients and service delivery and all of that, but we try and quantify what's going on. At the moment, that unmitigated risk, so after actions to try and manage that, is running at just over £90 million. So that's on top of the 57.1 million. There's some work to be done there, don't get me wrong. So I've been talking to Helen in particular, but the other directors of finance as well, about making sure that we're applying consistent assumptions about how we assess what that value is and what it looks like. And I know Helen wants to do some work on the SAF number in particular, ready for month 3. But let's be honest, whether it's 90 million or 60 million or, God forbid, it's even higher, the point is there's a real assessment there that we're looking to be off track, and it comes back to the points that Harry's been making. Let's not look backwards about why it's happened. Let's work through what the programme is to either tackle the things that have driven it off track or find alternate mitigations.
And to absolutely demonstrate we know what's happening, and none of this is blindsiding us.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important discussion. Simon, I'll bring you in at this point. I'll say what I was going to say in a moment.
Really helpful conversation. Agree with Katrina, Harry, Trevor, in terms of that non-exec bit of where are we at now, what's the forward look, recognising the profile that we've got across all the respective organisations. Myself, Claire, Louise and Helen have just been in a month 2 review conversation with NHSE regional and national colleagues. Clear there's concern in terms of where we're at month 2 given that profile, so we urgently need to do that next piece of the look forward that Harry, Katrina and Trevor have talked about. The piece that we need to get into urgently now is, and I don't want to redo the work of the urgent care board and the urgent care focus, but we were challenged really significantly on escalation, the escalation capacity, the bringing down of that as the unlocker in the system. We were challenged on that around the average length of stay, the no criteria to reside. How does that unlock the rest of the activity? Because then that links to agency spend, it links to all the elements that fall out of that. So we've got a clear and present focus priority now to get that to a fundamentally different place. And that then sits against, equally, each of our providers working through in detail the agency price cap compliance percentage, because that was highlighted as a significant risk in terms of where we're at with that. So you could see that off-framework versus on-framework change, but then the price cap compliance bit that fits within that then was a significant challenge. But the discharge approach, which is system-wide and involves all partners, SAF included, as well as local authorities, Shropcom, ICB, general practice, but we've got to unlock that escalation capacity urgently, otherwise we'll never get back where we've lost in month 2.
So what what do the executive want to do to take that forward? Have you had a chance to think about that?
I
since
came
the
out from
meeting
one meeting straight into this. To be
I
fair,
imagine you've got some thoughts about that, have you?
I have, but I'd like to have those conversations with chief
That's
exec
fine.
colleagues
That's fair.
rather than in a
Yep.
public board.
Yeah, okay. That's helpful. And can we receive advice about that as soon as practicable?
Absolutely. Yep.
Paulie.
Thank you. Claire, I think this is a great move forward in terms of a report, and you asked for some feedback. So for me, if we go back to focus on priorities, what are the focus priority actions? What is the likely impact of those actions? And that should enable us, regardless, not finance in particular, but whatever topic, to see what a trajectory is, so we then start to measure ourselves against that. Otherwise, it feels like we're always looking backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, I referenced earlier the packs, the data packs we're producing for the programme boards. They're not just a line graph, they're very much here's your trajectory, this is your distance from it, and then with narrative beneath that. So yeah, thank you, I'll take that back.
Looking around at any other further comments. So the big action piece that we've just talked about in terms of finance, we have a sense of warmth about the integrated report and how that's developing. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions with that. I guess if there are particular quality people issues, then we might pick those up when we get assurance reports from the various subcommittees in a few moments. But other than that, are we happy to accept this report? Thank you very much indeed. CCG and ICB annual reports. Claire Skidmore. I suspect this is fairly straightforward and fairly brief, is it? I hope that's not famous.
I'm hoping so.
We're not going to do a... Shall we do a page turn?
Oh, well, I'd love to.
It's considered as being led by the chair.
I was going to say, I was going to apologise for the fact that this is turning into the Claire Skidmore show, but I'll try and be brief. Yeah, as board members will be aware, we've had the joyous task of producing not one but two sets of annual reports and accounts this year. We are very, very near the final leg of all of the hard work that's come together, and we are looking to submit all of our paperwork on time tomorrow, subject to the board being content with what we've presented today. So yes, you'll have received quite a lot of information in the appendices. CCG accounts are there for noting and for information. The ICB annual report and accounts are absolutely for this board to sign off. Included with the documents themselves, we've got the letters of representation that we have to send alongside those that will go in Simon's name on behalf of the board, and we've also included the audit findings report so that you can see the comments from our auditors. I'm really pleased to say that both sets of accounts have been unqualified, very little in terms of adjustments that were suggested by the audit team, but actually the financial ones, our management response has been to say, no, thank you, we accept those figures and they're certainly not material in the grand scheme of things. We do have a last few minor areas of tidying up that we're just going through. So since the version that went to audit committee last week, the auditors came back with a final set of questions and requests. None of those changed the numbers, none of them changed the substance of what we're reporting. It's clarifying titles to sections, adding sentences under tables to better reflect what's in there, and a couple of disclosure notes surrounding a couple of items of pay. We also spotted that there was a very final section in the annual report that we'd missed, particularly relating to employee matters, trade union activities and some health and safety. It's really not material for the board to worry about, particularly with the trade union one. We haven't had any activity, so it's a table with zeros in it. But it's just important that for completeness we feel that we need to build them in. So my ask, and then I'll pause and cross everything, is that the board support these documents and just delegate responsibility to myself and Simon to sign off those last few amendments that aren't in the papers there, but as I say, do not materially change the substance of what you've got.
Roger Dunshay, can we ask you for your views?
Yes, Chair. And the Audit Committee met last week. We had a successful look at the reports from our internal auditors and external auditors. And I think all credit to Claire and her colleagues and also Alison in drafting up all the reports. It's been a monumental task to get this done in time, so well done to all involved. From the audit perspective, clean bill of health, as Claire has said. From internal audit, slight caveat around our risk management processes and board assurance framework that we need to get up and running as soon as we can. I think that point has been accepted so that by hopefully the second half of this year, from September onwards, we have an effective board assurance framework operating across the committees, etc. I think that's an important point to make. But apart from that point, I think generally it's been a good audit. There's been some useful recommendations made by Grant Thornton, which the finance team have largely accepted and are taking through, so that's the assurance that we need on that score. And then our final thoughts are really about how we report on 23-24. And I think bearing in mind we now have an operational plan, which we are now going to follow through, I think that should be the basis for our reporting for the coming year. And that we make this as accessible as we can to our stakeholders, because at the moment it's quite a bureaucratic format-based reporting system, which I understand. But I think as in terms of our accountability as an ICB and to our system, I think we can make some changes there to make it more readable and also more pertinent to the objectives and priorities that we have as an ICB. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. That's extremely helpful. I take it that having had the opportunity to look at the reports, people will have raised queries or during this discussion or previously. I haven't heard any really. So on that basis, I'm asking you to support Claire's recommendations that we approve the final versions. We delegate authority to Claire and Simon to adjust last minute accordingly, and we move on and look forward to the next.
We look forward to one set of accounts next year.
Precisely, one set of accounts. But well done, everybody. That's great. Thank you. Finance Committee amendment in terms of reference. Claire, presumably we can take these as read, can we?
Yes, please. It feels very trivial compared to the other areas that we've talked about, but it's due process to make sure that board are comfortable with the changes.
Oh, go on then, Harry.
I'm sorry. We've just spent a lot of time talking about finance, and I was just surprised to read that the requirement for the finance committee is to only meet 4 times a year. I would have thought symbolically it should be meeting more than that.
We meet 10 times a year because we exclude December and August.
Claire, this doesn't say that. It says 4 times. It says minimum 4 times.
I think it says minimum.
Yeah, I just think at the moment, if I was NHS looking at it,
yeah,
I'd say, why aren't you meeting every morning? So.
Yeah, no, we through our practice and the back history of meetings, you can see that. But I think that was a relatively standard item we put in for all of them. But yes, we meet every month.
Happy with the proposed amendments, thank you. Board committee reports. We have a large number of these. I'm sure the chairs will draw out the particularly important issues rather than going through each of the issues discussed at the different meetings. But let's test my hypothesis with Meredith in the first instance. Meredith.
I'm going to go further than that and say that I'd happily take questions from on them. There's nothing specific that I would wish to draw out as a highlight. Plus, we're running quite a long way behind scheduling as well, so some of these reports have been overtaken by other events. So happily take questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions? The next one is the Audit and Risk Committee's Chair's report. Anything further from you, Roger?
No, and just to say what Meredith said, any questions? I mentioned earlier about the board assurance framework and risk, and I think that's a key priority across the piece, but apart from that, nothing else to add.
What about the board assurance framework progress? Because we've had some concerns about that stalling in the past. Is that moving ahead as you'd like?
I think we will know more about that perhaps in September.
Right, okay. So there's nothing further to consider about that just now?
No.
Excellent. Finance Committee, Trevor, you've been very active recently through the Finance Committee. Anything else you want to add from that which we've discussed already this afternoon?
No, I think we've talked about all the important bits, because obviously the reports straddle the two financial years, and I think we've covered it all already.
Thank you. And do you want to say anything about the REMCOM report following the meeting on the 20th of June?
No, I'm clear for that as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. The next item is the Strategy Committee. Cathy?
I'm going to assume everybody has read it. The only caveat I'd say is we've arranged a separate meeting with Dr. White to go through aspects of the clinical strategy with him, but apart from that, I'm happy to take questions.
And that's purely because it's held on Thursday, and Thursdays they work clinically. So thank you for accommodating me.
Thank you. The People Committee hasn't met recently. Katrina?
No, we were to meet yesterday, this morning, but due to a mixture of circumstances, my own included, that wasn't. But in addition to that, we're actually planning an in-depth conversation with Simon to really look at the purpose of the People Committee, because so much of the people stuff goes to other committees, that there's a lot of duplication. So we're really going to look at the framework and really hone in where the committee can add greatest value. That's the advantage of Alex coming on board. She's really helping us shape that.
So is the People Committee the locus for discussion about the National People Strategy when we finally get it, to start giving us advice about it and its implications? Would that make sense?
Well, you see, that's the conversations that we're needing to have, because of course we've got the strategy committee, we've got the committee and everything else.
For sure,
so
but
it's about making sure we're adding value rather than inducing duplication. But with Alex coming in, I think it's the right time to really frame that.
Thank you very much. Primary Care Commissioning Committee, Nitty isn't here. Nick, do you want to?
Yeah, I won't comment. I'm very happy to answer questions on any items on it.
And then we have the Integrated Delivery Committee.
Yeah, the 12 there's 2 reports and 2 meetings. I'll just focus on the second one, because the other one's old. There's 12 recommendations, many of which we've discussed. There are 4 recommendations there regarding virtual ward, raising issues, but there's also a solution there around the expansion forum that's been created to solve those issues. So we were confident that there was action being taken. And then the annual thing really is the endoscopy and faster diagnosis standard, which was behind trajectory, but did have a trajectory to achieve the target by the end of the year.
Everybody happy with that? Just one last question from me about the committees in general. It's really just to log the fact that we've got, just to remind everyone, the Good Governance Institute, who are doing a review of the committee structures. They're looking at functions, considering overlaps and how things might be simplified, and a multiplicity of other things as well. So Alison, could you just remind us of the engagement process? Because I know there are 1 or 2 people at least around this table who would like to have conversations with the Good Governance Institute as part of their work, and also the timelines.
Yeah, so this is really helpful, because I'm actually just about to email out to all board members, to our chairs of committees, and to those that attend our committees, whether they're members or attendees, with some information. Some of it's generic, so that you're just aware of what the terms of reference are, and also a request that you fill out a survey, and also for some of you that we actually set up those conversations directly with the Good Governance Institute consultants who are leading the piece of work. So that's the plan of action, and I'm literally doing those emails as I speak. In terms of the timeline, originally the terms of reference did say that our first phase, which was the mapping exercise, so what have we got, what are they doing, how does it all link together, would be finished in June. Clearly it's taken a bit longer for some of the paperwork and some of the desk-based collation of information to actually come on stream. So we're now looking by the end of July. And then the second phase of work, which will be much longer and going into the autumn and winter, will be about embedding what processes we want to put in place, embedding the structures that we may want to move to if there's any changes around committees, and actually getting, excuse me, some of the basic culture and behaviours in place that we all need to attend to, and also some of the sort of the processes of actually making sure that committees are running in the right way, they've got the right level of support, chairs are supported, etc. in place as well. But the email that I will send out will actually just give you a little bit more detail on the terms of reference and what the actual parts of the 2 phases. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I haven't had notice of any items for any other business, so I hereby declare the meeting closed. Our next meeting is the 27th of September. It says here Shrewsbury, somewhere in Shrewsbury. Thank you very much indeed.
September.